Stacey, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. So, Stacey, I met you through one of my best friends, Joe, and you were a training client of mine when you lived in the area. And I've also actually worked with you in your professional work as a licensed therapist, right? So I'd love it if you just would tell a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I'm a licensed clinical therapist and then evolved into a wellness practitioner.
What's the difference?
Right, and so basically what that means is, I love therapy, I love theory, but also looking at ways that we can heal holistically and kind of taking those two and putting them together.
Awesome.
Oh, yes,
Awesome.
And I'm the owner of Passionate Life Coaching.
Yes. Oh. And I love that name. So what's the meaning behind Passionate Life Coach?
So when I was younger, I was not a child that was very interested in many things. And so at a younger age, people thought that was kind of like weird or a problem. What I found as I got older was that I'm very selective about my passions. And so when I was kind of coming up with, well, what do I call my business? It just kind of came out that Passionate Life Coaching would be a good fit.
That's awesome. And I can relate to that because on the last podcast, I did a little bit of a rant, and one of the things that I mentioned is that sometimes there's these systems in the world that are not really set up for our success. And I struggled when I was younger with ADHD, and at least I was diagnosed with that. Yes, you can relate. I know you can, right? And similarly, I'm like, why is it a good thing to be interested in things that are boring?
Yeah,
right?
It's a great question.
Like everyone really living their best life is minimizing the amount of things that they have to do that are boring and uninteresting, drudgery, right? So you saying, I'm more selective about things I'm passionate about. I'm like, well, yeah, that's the way it should be, right? So it's strange that society kind of
doesn't fit into whatever mold that society had at the time, right? So you just create your own.
It's that simple. Here we are, exactly. Hey guys, quick break here. Just want to ask you guys to like, subscribe, and share the content with others who you think would benefit if you found this video helpful or any of our videos. Also, please comment. At the end of the day, we do these videos for you. We love your feedback. We'll always reply to the comments in the comment section and keep them in mind for future videos. So I've been really looking forward to having you on because one of the things that in fitness, especially as you gain more experience, and in my position as a coach, Nico understands this, we talk about this a lot, is you can't really separate psychology from anything.
No.
Right? I mean, humanness is psychology, right?
Every day.
It's a technical term, humanness, right? And so if you want to be an effective coach, you really have to explore more of the psychology, more of what's going on in someone's life, things like bringing it back to your holistic comment, right? How is sleep impacting someone's fitness goals? How is stress, relationship dynamics, all that stuff, right? So we only go so far, right? And so I've always loved the idea of having someone on who can be sort of our, someone who can offer that professional, high-level perspective on mental health, psychology, all that stuff, right? So I've been really looking forward to So I've really been looking forward to this. So when you and I were going back and forth on how we could approach this conversation, one of the things, I mentioned is, hey, maybe for the first time we talk about how some of these things relate to fitness. And so you sent me your outline here, and so I'd love to just dive into each point here.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
So the first thing you mentioned is the inner child and how childhood experiences influence adult behaviors and fitness goals. For example, fear of failure, negative body image.
Yes.
So why is that one of the things you felt was, because you put that at the top?
Yes. So I feel like, it's kind of like when you're going on a journey, you kind of have to start somewhere. So what I find is that the inner child is a really good place to start.
Okay.
Which obviously I want to expand on that more. But I think when we're looking at our behaviors and our patterns, like why are we doing certain things, looking at where do we keep these deeper emotions, the inner child is really that space that we do that. And so, for example, if you were a younger child, and let's just say that you were always praised for performance, you were praised for how you looked, then later in life, you may have a really difficult time with being on the spot to perform, or your body image might get distorted because you only saw your value in the way that you were validated at that time.
Okay.
And so the inner child is such an important piece to understand and nurture, which I'd love to go more in depth as we continue.
Yes. How would you define? So for someone, I'm a bit more familiar with that because I like researching into this stuff, and some of my coursework is not necessarily touched on the inner child, but this kind of thing. And you and I have had so many conversations. But how for someone who hears that and goes, "Oh, what's the inner child? Is that some woo-woo stuff?" Right? Like, how would you explain it to someone in layman's terms?
Right. So it is. So one of the things we knock like consciousness, subconscious. Okay, those are two different things. So one of the things I like to talk about is implicit memory.
Okay.
And so implicit, I know that's not necessarily like dumbing it down, but I think it's important for people to understand.
Let's do it.
So implicit memory is basically all of the memories that are not clear stories. They don't have specified things that are conscious. So the implicit memory lives in the subconscious.
Okay.
So what that means is when you have a behavior, when you have a reaction, people who are very reactive, typically that's because it's stored in those cells of your body, which is where the inner child lives. And so, when we are, maybe going through different things like, I don't know, for me, and I'd be happy to tell about my story.
Yeah.
Your nervous system starts to react to certain things. Sometimes we have to slow down instead of judging ourselves, recognize there's probably a part of us, which is most likely that inner child, that's actually saying like, hey, I need your attention.
Yeah. Like a kid.
Exactly.
Acknowledge me.
So when I think of inner child, I think of that's like this vulnerable part of us. It's this very sweet, soft, sometimes passive part of us that we actually need to acknowledge and talk to and learn how to teach it how to be courageous.
Okay. That's awesome. Yeah, so you just alluded to, right, your background, right, or your story, right? So it is very interesting, right, when you and I first started working together.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, like you sent me this long text message, which at the time, we talked about this like a week or two ago when we were all hanging out. I'm like, okay, I don't really know what this means exactly, but I'm open-minded and let's figure this out, right? So so why don't you tell more about kind of your story, how you began training with me, and then maybe how that ties into some of the topics we're talking about.
Absolutely. So before I go into the story, I do want to kind of explain a little bit just about our parts. Okay, so I tell you the inner child, but there's actually a whole group of people inside of us. It's not like we have like multiple personalities. But my favorite theory that I was introduced to is called internal family systems theory.
Okay.
Okay, so IFS is what we kind of just abbreviate it as, and it was created by Dr. Richard Schwartz. Okay. And so the way that I like to envision this is like kind of think about if you go to like a Thanksgiving dinner. Okay, you've got that long table. At the head of the table is your true self, like the empowered self that's creative and curious and compassionate. But think about now, okay, we got to invite the rest of the family.
Yeah.
So we've got maybe, the part of us that is, the family member that's drinking way too much to numb whatever's going on and being loud and obnoxious. Maybe you've got that other adult part of you that is really focused on being perfect and everything's got to go just right for dinner or it's ruined.
Yeah.
You have the teenage part of you that's coming in who's, like, screw this dinner. I don't care about anything.
Yeah, whatever.
Like, whatever. Which I'm sure a lot of us can relate to.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you've got that, I think of like a little 7-year-old child who, maybe is scared to ask for help or is afraid to talk to the authority figures in the room, is very passive and scared to be vulnerable.
Okay.
And so
almost like fly on the wall.
Yeah.
Right? Wallflower.
Or
Right.
it could even go the opposite direction. Maybe you've got that inner child who's like obnoxious and breaking things and running around and hitting the
Yeah.
walls or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so it's really important that we kind of acknowledge that as one human, like you had said, in our humanness, we do this weird thing where like we have this identity and we're like, hey, this is just how I am. This is my personality, which is actually not true. Because if our personality is more like our personal reality, then we have the ability to look at, okay, well, what part of me is coming out right now? Is there, like even right now, me being on your podcast, there's a part of me that's really, nervous because it's something new. It's a new thing for me.
Yeah.
And so, you have to kind of talk to that part of you and that adult, that leader who's at the head of that table, who's in that true self, is like, hey, you got this.
Yeah,
it's okay. We're doing this, So I want to explain that first, and then bringing that to obviously the story that involves you.
Yeah.
And my fitness journey.
Yeah.
And so do you want me to just hop right into that?
Well, yes, I do. And I think that's really cool to talk about because I've been exposed to this idea in the last couple of years of, it's called, I've heard it referred to as the dilemma, right? Which is, you're talking in this parts theory about there's different aspects of yourself, right?
Yes.
And not necessarily wrong or right. They just are.
Just
and
are.
you have to learn how to deal with them, right? And similarly, in this dilemma, there's this idea of you have an overarching goal and you have these decisions to contend with. And neither of them are wrong or right because they both serve you.
Exactly.
So, for example, someone might want to lose weight, and then they're dealing with this decision of what to eat, and it's here's cake and here's not eat cake, right? It's not inherently evil to eat cake,
No.
right? It's
I love
not
cake.
wrong to eat cake, right? And so the part of you that wants to eat cake isn't bad,
No.
right? So it's just separating that emotional or like almost making it too binary of it's evil, right? That's the devil on your shoulders. No, it's
Absolutely.
just they both serve you. On some level, you're hungry. On some level, you want something sweet. Maybe on some level, you need some dopamine because you're feeling a little stressed from the day,
Yeah.
right? And on this one, you do want to lose the weight, so you understand on some level eating cake may not be the best decision.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's I see some parallels
Not good
there.
or bad. You're not like trying to like categorize them as like good or evil, basically.
Yeah, it's just, how are you going to navigate that in that moment? And it might be different from time to time.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. So, and then being different, kind of going back to that theory, which I'll point out in my own story as well. So Dr. Richard Schwartz kind of breaks this down into 3 different categories. So we've got the manager, and we have the firefighters, and we have the exiles. Okay.
Ooh, the exiles.
Yes.
So mysterious.
I know. And they are actually to us. That's the part usually that's hiding from ourselves that we have to find.
Oh, okay.
So the managers are essentially like, think of perfectionism, the
Okay.
ones that are planning and going and just got to keep striving and grinding and all the things to just
Yeah.
get things done.
Yeah.
Their primary goal is to control the environment and to control you to protect you from a negative outcome. So if you can imagine, if we're living out of the manager space, we're probably having a hard time getting out of our comfort zone because it doesn't feel safe to do so.
Okay.
And we may not be perfect in that environment. Where we think about now the firefighters are those that think of like a firefighter. They spring to action. They're coming to put out the fire. And so essentially, if you're feeling uncomfortable or there's an emotion that is triggered from some trauma wound that you haven't healed yet, then the firefighter might make decisions such as binge eating, shopping, using drugs or alcohol, gambling, or maybe just simply getting you out of an environment that feels uncomfortable, which might keep you from an opportunity.
To fix.
Yes.
To save you.
And
right?
to numb you, really.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, to numb you, to
Whatever
make you
you
feel
need.
like, okay, whatever I need to do to feel good and safe again, which usually is self-sabotaging.
Yeah.
And then we have the exiles. And so this is usually where our inner child lives. I say she because that's, of course, for me. She's, she hides and she's afraid. She's so scared and she might be sad and she's, not really sure of who she is in the world around her. We call her exile. We're saying that she's probably in the exiled parts of us is because if we have a wound that we haven't healed, it's because we've been avoidant to it, or it's still subconscious. There hasn't been any work done to bring it to the conscious layer so that you can work through it.
Yeah.
Which is what you actually had witnessed inside of me when we first started working out together.
Yeah. Would you say in that moment you were consciously aware of it, or was it more subconscious at that point?
It was definitely more subconscious.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Like you were aware it was a problem, but not necessarily sure where it was
like
coming
what
from?
was happening. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's interesting.
So I guess for our listeners, kind of going into that story. So first, I just want to say Danny is an amazing trainer, and very patient and all the things. But when we first started together, it was interesting because, I'm someone that didn't work out. I wasn't part of I didn't do sports, and I didn't really work out like that until I was 30. And so
Which is surprising because when I first started working with you, you had so much trepidation.
Yeah.
But you were actually, once we got going, you were actually surprisingly athletic.
Oh, okay.
I'm like, Stacey, okay, all right.
Maybe I should have played sports.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I remember we were first starting and it was the weirdest thing because, weightlifting was never part of my norm. I had never done that. And she married the most buff, jacked person in the world. Yeah, really, that's how that worked out.
Yeah.
So, and of course, he's not going to let me not work out. So,
yeah.
But beginning in just resistant training. What I noticed was any time that my body started feeling resistance, my nervous system started to kick in. My adrenaline shot through the roof. Immediately, because of that, cortisol levels were heightened. I'd get really angry. I'd get really scared. And in terms of this context, what would happen is the firefighter would come into the driver's seat, being like, nope, this is dangerous. Put the weights down. We're out. We're leaving. We're done. Luckily, I had such a great trainer that there were times where even though tears were coming, it'd be like, okay, just walk on the treadmill. Let's just talk through whatever we got to talk through.
Yeah.
And you have no idea how important that is because when that happens, in that moment, most people feel like there is no one that's safe to talk to. There is no safe environment. The only safety is for me to run, hide, and escape this dangerous environment. And so it took me a while, to get into resistant training and feel like I can actually be in a gym longer than a few minutes, or I can actually move up the scale of the resistance and then work through what the nervous system was trying to tell me.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think that with age, you just become, wiser, more mature, and you naturally heal from things. And that's not true. Because our nervous system doesn't remember. Again, that implicit memory, it stores memory and it codes things in ourselves that even if we're in our 30s, that 10-year-old or 13-year-old or whatever age you were when you experienced that trauma, it comes out and you start reacting and responding just like you were at those ages. And so for me, I have been diagnosed with PTSD, and I do have a past of physical trauma. And so when lifting a weight would be, oh, this is resistance, all of a sudden my body's like, are you in physical trauma right now?
It's adjacent to it, right?
Absolutely. So, again, so the firefighter is the one who'd be like, no, we're leaving the gym now. Screw this. We're going to go get Taco Bell next door, right?
Yeah.
We'll eat our feelings away.
It's so funny that just leaving here, it's like Taco Bell or Wendy's.
Yeah, this is great options.
Every time you leave.
But now if we were looking at hypothetically, if the manager part would have been in control, that would have been the part of me that would have probably called you up and said, you know what, Danny, I'm quitting fitness. I no longer want you to be my trainer, and I'm just going to give up on this fitness journey because it's not a good fit for me. And I'd make an excuse of why I shouldn't go into that environment.
Okay, I see.
Make a difference.
Still protect you, but in a bit more of a polished way.
Exactly.
That still was I'm in control.
It's just not a good fit for me. I don't need to do this. But
and I wonder how many people do that without realizing. Like you said, it's more in the subconscious of they've never entered a gym.
Right.
Or, I this is probably more conscious, but some subconscious, I'm sure. Like Nico and I have seen this all the time, where women don't want to go over by the dumbbells.
Okay. Yeah.
And
I could see that.
It's all this fear because there's so many men
Absolutely.
who are more proficient, maybe intimidating, right?
Absolutely.
Or I'm going to look stupid. And so I'm sure in some ways a lot of those, the firefighter, the manager, maybe I'm sure all of those are online to an extent.
They're all online, yes. Well, and also I think too, you know, I think when we are dealing with a wound internally of like being afraid of being seen, you know, I think sometimes that's, or there's the comparison factor in a gym.
Yeah.
And so, you know, obviously I can only speak as a woman of not wanting to go where like everybody can look at me or, you know, draw attention to myself or, oh my gosh, you're looking at this person over there and am I as good as that person? And it starts to create this inner dialogue of that inner critic.
Yeah.
So even going to these voices, I do want to kind of point out a little bit about that.
Well, I never had to worry too much about comparing because I grew up with your husband, who always had 20-inch arms by the time he was 14. So I'm like, well, I'm just going to focus on my improvements.
Exactly.
Because that's over here and I'm here, so.
Oh, I love that. I love your guys' friendship so much. But, you know, I think, like, I love that you use the word humanness because, my gosh, can we all just acknowledge that we're human? And it's okay for me to be nervous on this podcast. And it's okay that I, you know, had these jolt reactions in the gym that maybe to somebody looking on the outside looking at me in that moment would be like, oh, she's kind of weird. Like, that's a little strange that she's having that reaction.
Yeah.
But we have to remember that we have to acknowledge that it wasn't weird. It actually makes a lot of sense. And we have to validate our own self in those moments. And so again, kind of looking at, I think all of us as humans, we struggle in some way, shape, or form with the inner critic.
Oh, yeah.
So when we're thinking about the inner critic voice, we want to acknowledge that the inner critic is a manager, trying to manage our perfectionism, trying to manage like being good enough to be loved, essentially. I think being accepted and belong somewhere and cared for, not abandoned. Those are always kind of the main like fears that we're all trying to combat from like those inner parts of us.
Yeah.
But again, I also think it's really important to understand that anytime you're in any healing process, again, going to parts theory, it's inevitable that this firefighter part of you is probably going to come out because it's designed to take you away from the thing you're afraid of and put you back into a place of safety, even if it's not good for you in the ways that you're doing it. So it doesn't mean that something's wrong. It just means that you're in the process of healing and you have to work through those things.
Yeah.
And so again, like in my story, it went from 10 minutes into a workout, my adrenaline is in fight or flight, like my nervous system is just going haywire. I'm firefighters coming in. Nope, girl, we are out of here. We are leaving. Like, bye, daddy. Like, whatever.
I'd go home every day and I have scratches on my face and black
eye.
eye. Crystal's like, Stacey again? I'm like, yeah.
Sorry.
She's working through stuff.
My bad. Or, you know, what happened then, that next step, because we think of it, it's like we'd love to do just like, oh my gosh, I'm here and now I'm all the way over there. But there's steps. And so for me, what that next step looked like was I went into the bathroom and I'd cry for a few minutes, wipe my tears, come back out, continue the workout. Once I got to that phase and I recognized, okay, like I don't have to go in the bathroom and cry. I'm not feeling the need to leave. So then it was, okay, the minute that comes up, there was times I remember telling you, hey, I have to take a pause. And there would be moments where internally, whether I actually physically put my hand over my heart or just like internally I'm deep breathing, I would have to tell myself, hey, like, I hear you. I see you. We're here. We're okay. I got you. We're safe. That actually speaking to your inner self saying, we are safe. Not like you're safe, but we are safe. Yeah. Because I think, again, one of the things that humans need for true survival and really to thrive is to not be isolated, to have connection.
Yeah.
And we don't really think about it, but in, again, parts theory, it's all about self-leadership. We're not, you know, as a therapist, I don't want my clients to be codependent on me. I want to teach them how to fish, not fish for them all the time, right? And I'm sure
awesome.
you also feel that. I mean, you did that for me. And so, being able to have that inner dialogue and language to yourself to let her know or him know that I know you're freaking out right now. Like, I can feel it. I got you. I know what this is. We've been here. We're here together. Let's just take the next step.
Yeah.
So in my mind, it was never like I guess in my story, I was pretty good at not letting the manager try to come into the driver's seat where it was like that perfectionism of like, I have to finish this workout perfectly.
Yeah.
It was more about like, what's that next step that I can take in order to really like, maybe just stay at the gym longer. Maybe it's, get through that resistance on 5 pounds heavier or whatever it was of just that next step.
Yeah. I love that because in some ways, this idea of incremental improvement is very common sense in the gym.
Sure, yeah.
But not necessarily psychologically,
yeah.
right? And I was just talking to one of my clients earlier today, not about this particular example, I won't say his example, but,
Sure.
A lot of the times people are going to be judgmental of themselves, of not being, maybe that's the manager, right? Saying, hey, if you can't do 5 days a week, then you just suck, and then maybe this isn't for you. And then someone like me can come online and just say, well, what about 4 days a week? What about 3? What about 2? What about 1, right? And it's that black and white way of viewing things sometimes. So it's that self-sabotage.
It really is.
And really, you could just say, like, the way I look at it is, hey, maybe you're not ready to not eat ice cream at the end of the night.
Right.
Maybe for you that's a 100-pound dumbbell that you're just not ready to lift. But starting to eat fruit after dinner to get some sweet in your sweetness,
Get a little bit of that dopamine rush
some of the
from the
fiber,
sugar.
the dopamine rush. Maybe that's the 20-pound dumbbell that you are ready to lift. And I think the tendency sometimes for some people is to say, well, that's the thing. It's the ice cream. That's my big issue. And it's like, it may be,
Right.
but you may not be ready for it.
So what you just said is so key, actually, to part theory, because going back to my story, right? There was the wounded part of me is the part that I exiled, right? And so what that means is, essentially, there was a part of me that had been through physical trauma. And what I didn't know at the time was that I had a firefighter who continuously kept going in the driver's seat, whether it was to leave the gym or any time that physical trauma was triggered in my mind, that I would go to, you name it, whether it was excessive shopping, going out and drinking too much, whatever it was, to just numb this. What I needed to actually just take a second, stop and look at. And so when we're practicing things like this, it's almost like, and you think of like, for me, I thought of, okay, there's this part of me who's been through the physical trauma and she's in her room, everybody's at the Thanksgiving dinner table and she's just in her room, like, and I never even invited her to dinner. Like, it's Thanksgiving. Why did I just let her stay in her room for all this time, and ignored her and avoided her? And so in that sense, it was like I had to recognize, first off, that she exists and she's in that room. Secondly, that she's deserving of being engaged with. And even though there might be, maybe things that I felt ashamed of, right? Yeah, it was a light bulb moment over here. Or
I'm just like, I'm like simultaneously, there's one person at the dinner table listening to you, and then there's another person at the dinner table going, oh, how does this all apply to me?
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's great.
There's stuff coming up for sure.
Well, I'm thank you for sharing that, because this is all of us. Like, as every single human, we have this going on. And if we're not, if somebody's sitting there thinking, well, not me, your manager is probably in the driver's seat saying that. Just putting that out there.
Yeah.
But going back to, the engagement, it's like, all right, like, I'm knocking on her door first. I'm not opening the door and saying, come to dinner. I'm knocking on the door and I'm saying, hey, do you want to come to dinner? Because I'd love to have you. And let her decide, is she ready to come out? Is she ready to engage with conversation about why she's been in her room for all of these years, isolated and ignored? And then at that point, when she finally comes to dinner, it's my job for her to talk to her, acknowledge her existence, help her to feel safe, to let all of the things that have been keeping her back come out, and then validate her. So again, from that like self-leadership position, allowing yourself to say, you know, if you're talking to me, right? You're talking to one of your good friends. You're just like, hey, like, I see that and I feel you and I'm here and I got you and we're going to get through this. And I mean, you're just being loving and empathetic.
Yeah, just like you would be to a friend.
Exactly.
At least hopefully.
Yeah, well, yeah, hopefully. But that's where I think self-compassion is, in my opinion, like the number one skill set that most of us weren't taught. There wasn't like, you know, hey, you've got Algebra 2 and self-compassion class. And so I think we do have to actually take time to, you know, read and listen and practice and journal what self-compassion dialogue sounds like so that we can start to feel normalized in speaking to ourselves with that lens.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you brought it earlier. You were talking about how it's just the humanness, people being more vulnerable, right? Because we are all going through these things. It might not be the same things.
Right.
One person might hear what you're saying and go, wow, that's pretty intense, right? That's not my life experience. And someone else might go, you think that's intense, right?
Yeah.
You got to hear my stuff, you know?
Exactly.
And we're all dealing with different things. And, you know, I believe, to your point, having this open dialogue, more people just kind of being open, vulnerable, just to get the conversation going, you know, that's when we're really going to get to the bottom of it.
Absolutely.
Right? And that kind of ties into what you were just saying with the inviting to dinner. It's like,
Yes.
it's like, hey, I'm acknowledging this part of me that exists, right? Part of what I was thinking about when you were like, what's going on for you, right,
Yeah.
is I have a tendency sometimes when I am stressed to overeat. Right? Like I know it's happening, right? Where I just want to eat some chocolate or something.
Me too.
Or something like that, right? But I'm not, but I know it's not just like I want something sweet. I'm aware of the fact that I'm trying to cope with something.
I get what you're saying.
Right? And it never occurred to me. I always have looked at that and I'm like, I hate that part of me. That part of me is despicable. It's no self-control.
Right.
It's hypocritical. It's
Right.
blah, 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 blah. And so I never thought about it from the standpoint of, okay, that's there, and that's part of me. So how do I better understand that part of me, as opposed to just trying to put it in
Push
the
'em
corner
away.
or hate it.
Exactly.
Right? And so I'm already kind of, it's sort of odd to say that I'm excited to feel
in
like
there.
coping with food or something like that. And, but there is a part of me that's like, the next time I'm under a tremendous amount of stress, which is typically when that happens, I'm like, I want to get to that moment and then be like, hold on, fellas.
Yeah, right, exactly. Right.
Let's talk for a second. You're here, I'm here. What are we going to do?
Talk
right?
through this.
You know, and so I don't know. I'm excited for that.
I'm really happy about that
You know?
too. And what you mentioned too, and I'm not trying to make this like, you know, just specific to men or women. I mean, we're all humans again. But something that I do see a lot more in men, just from my pool of clients, is this kind of self-hatred, I would say, like this inner anger or self-loathing towards the self in a lot of men who have not come to terms with that part of themselves that's really just, you know, just really hurting. That maybe is just so afraid of vulnerability because every time that they were vulnerable, they were rejected or shamed or, oh, you're not man enough, or whatever those old phrases that people would, you know, tie to masculinity. And so, you know, again, not just for men, but just kind of pointing out that I do think that there's like I don't know, there's a space where I think you can look at to say, okay, man, I'm really hating this. I'm hating this about myself. Like, what is this? Well, then I would just say take a piece of paper out and like literally like, you know, journal out and verbally vomit all over the piece of paper of all of the icky feelings that you're feeling towards yourself. And like, then think back of like, when did I first feel that? I mean, sometimes it's hard to identify, which is why I'd say if you need a professional to work with, clearly that's why people like myself do what we do. But having to live that and through that myself, I just want to, I guess, I don't know, just say it's okay to be human. Like, we are complex. We are not just one identity. So I think when people have these contradictory, like, feelings, or, you're feeling hypocritical because you're like, well, I feel this way, but then I also feel this way. It's like we are going to live in a space of, whether it's not even just duality, it's like so many different pieces of ourselves that all we really got to do is learn how to love and integrate and engage with, so that, again, we can lead them and they stop leading us.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it's interesting because, through talking, as you're talking about this, you and I have talked about like shadow work.
Yes.
Right, which is kind of adjacent to this in some way, shape, or form, right? And that's something I've experienced a lot in the last couple of years, through some retreats I've done, right? And that was one of the first times that came online for me, where it's like, you mentioned how many people struggle with not feeling good enough.
Exactly.
Right, and I'm like going through the experience, you go back in time and you figure out, okay, that's where one of the times this I'm not good enough message came online when I was young, and how I learned to deal with it. And now I'm in traffic and someone cut me off and I just cussed them out. I'm not really mad at them.
Right.
I'm mad at the fact that I feel inadequate in this moment, and I'm just looking to target someone for that feeling of inadequacy. And it's all kind of goes back to kind of that coping mechanism that you created. And what's interesting about it is you were talking about earlier about how if you don't address something as a kid, we have this idea we just get older and it's fine, right? And what's interesting about that is that's totally counterintuitive to physical injury, right?
Yeah, it's
like
true.
You would not assume that if you broke your leg and, well, when I'm older, this will be fine. It's like, no, you have to get it reset and heal it, right? But it's that classic example of if someone broke their leg, you'd say, are you okay? But if someone's dealing with depression or whatever, a lot of the times the tendency is to, come on, man, just get over it. Right? And I would imagine a lot of that just get over it mindset, push forward, is the source of a lot of grief for a lot of people.
100%. And I'm glad you brought that up too, because I do think that, we live in a world where, let's be honest, like there's so many external pressures. I mean, social media, for example, can trigger the comparison thing.
Yeah, like crazy.
And, we have these responsibilities. We got to do this and do that and whatever. And so it's very easy to get stuck permanently in the manager with the firefighter. Like the manager's like, we got to be on. It's like almost, not that I don't love David Goggins, but it's like that David Goggins like, just push through. Keep going. And I think that, and then when we're not, well, then the firefighter comes to numb out so we can hopefully rest and then get back online. And it's really just, it's not healthy. I've been there, and I understand it. But I think, again, it just comes down to, how do we actually fall in love with all of the parts of us? Even the parts, there are absolutely parts of me from the past where I can think about that part of me and be like, whoa, I don't like that part.
It makes me think of Bill Burr. Do you know Bill Burr?
I do,
Oh, yeah, we've watched Bill Burr all
Bill
as a
Burr.
group, right? And so he was talking about this one time, he's like in the shower and like he had an intrusive thought about something that happened or like was something, right? That's part of his story, and he just starts going la 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 la, like because he's just like, I don't want to think about that. It's just making me feel icky, right? But it happened, right? And if you ignore it, it's probably just gonna blow out sideways, right?
Absolutely. Well, and I think when we kind of stay stagnant in the space of kind of sticking our head in the sand or keeping whichever part locked up in a dungeon or whatever, never engaging with them at the dinner table, we find that we become really judgmental of others because we're judgmental of ourselves. We feel very inferior to people who are more successful than we are and are constantly shaming ourselves and ripping ourselves apart. Like that inner critic just becomes this big old monster that's literally taking front and center stage all of the time. And it really doesn't get us anywhere we want to be. So it really is sabotaging. And so it's so important just to recognize that, like, we have to learn the language of self-compassion. It's really coming back to, what does vulnerability with yourself look like? And is it okay that you're not perfect? I think logically we know, like, hey, none of us are perfect, but but do our emotions receive that? Are we actually accepting that? Probably the answer is no if you haven't worked through those things yet.
Yeah. Yeah, and that it's logical to think that way. Like I think that if you, like, I'm thinking of this childhood book, I can't remember what it is, but like it's like about a dragon that a little kid keeps ignoring. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I actually do know what you're talking about. Yeah, but I don't want to call it that.
But it's kind of like that, right? Like he keeps ignoring so there's this little dragon in his house, and he keeps ignoring it, and then it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Until you have to look
until
at it
the
now.
time that it's like as big as the house.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden he acknowledges the dragon, and then all of a sudden
I'm gonna go back and read
it's
that
back
book
to
now.
being like a tiny little dragon. I think I was reading as like, I can't remember whether one of my kids had it or what, but and then but it's one of those ones where you're
Actually,
like,
very emotionally
you're like,
intelligent
I
book.
need to read this for me, right?
Yeah.
You
I
know,
take that.
but yeah, I think a lot of the times, when people do get into the habit of ignoring that stuff,
So easy.
it is so easy. And part of it, like you were talking about, all our responsibilities of life, right? Sometimes it just seems like one more thing to do.
Absolutely.
Right.
And
It's
you're like,
like-
oh, I'm already exhausted. Like, oh. But really what I have found is, okay, so I can't lie and say that it's not exhausting to go through the work, or that it doesn't take time and patience and all of that effort. But once you do it, all the things that already felt so exhausting, like you're already at a 10 of exhaustion, now you're at like a 4 or 5, because it doesn't take as much effort or energy because you're not all up in your head ripping yourself to shreds or ignoring this part of you that's just screaming to be heard. And so actually things get easier once you get through, the trenches of the healing process.
Yeah.
Which is really great.
In your practice, have you noticed a more consistent theme related to health, and how, like, for example, your psychological health impacts physical health, whether it be surrounding pain,
Sure.
working out, eating, etc.?
I feel like it's like a cycle, right? Because, I think more than now than ever, we learn how gut health impacts your brain health. And how, your gut is actually formed in the womb before the brain. So technically it's kind of like your first brain. But I think it's like this cycle, right? So if what we're eating and what we're putting in our body and what we're doing in movement is impacting the dopamine, serotonin levels, managing cortisol in your brain, and then what's happening in your brain affects the behaviors that you're taking and what you're eating and how you're moving. It's just like this constant cycle if you're not actually intentional. And so I think that it's so important, to work with people like yourself and like me, maybe a nutritionist, like people that will help guide you on how to rewire those patterns in your gut and in your brain, and how to take those action steps, not from an all or a nothing, but just from like those like small incremental steps like you were talking about.
That's awesome. So two of the bullet points you have here that I think could be a great place to kind of wrap up the conversation, because I'm blowing my mind that 40 minutes already went by. We need
So
more.
fun.
We need more time, and we'll have to have you back on, right?
Yeah.
But you have achieving goals using self-compassion and inner harmony to set and reach goals, including fitness. And then you also have healing blocks, practical steps to heal and balance parts to remove mental barriers. So do you think it's more important to discuss one before the other?
No, either one.
Okay. So could you do one without doing the other necessarily?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, I think going back to like, on a human level, we all want to achieve greatness, if you will.
Yeah.
However that looks like to us. But recognizing that if we are allowing that achiever to be in the driver's seat, without the compassion that's required, then we're going back to that perfectionism lens. And so we do have to recognize that in achieving like failure, like how do you learn? You have to fail.
Yeah.
So being accepting of failure, being accepting of that learning process. And part of that is like, so for example, if you're in the gym, your goal is to become consistent, not because you're pressuring yourself to be consistent, but because you're using self-care.
Yeah.
You think about when you're just you have a setback, right? Let's say that whenever you're stressed out, you ate all the cookies at Crumble Cookie, and you skipped the gym for a week. Instead of letting that setback put you into a place of shame, then now you begin to again be like, okay, like, girl, it is okay. Like, we got this. Let's just get back in there. Let me call my trainer. Let me be vulnerable. Let me kind of, work through maybe, this week instead of starting over, right? It's like, no, we're just hopping right back in.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So what I will say, I just want to put this out here for your listeners because I know we're closing. If you've been listening to this and you feel like, maybe I need to be curious about some of these parts, and there's parts of me that, I don't know, I never even knew existed. Feel free to email me at Stacey@passionate-life-coaching.com, and I'll send you a free PDF of journal prompts and kind of some more explanation on what we said here today.
That's awesome.
And if you reach out to me and you say, hey, because of Danny's podcast, I'm reaching out and you want to explore something further, then I'll give a $50 discount on whatever package.
Sweet. I might do that. And what are some of your websites and other ways people can reach you?
Yeah, so passionatelifecoaching.com is my website.
Okay.
Feel free to go to that. And you can also find me on Instagram, which is also on my website. So
awesome. Yeah, so one last thing I want to ask you is, Nico and I are big fans of the tiny habits model, where it's talking about just kind of these smaller ways to, break down goals.
Absolutely.
Right? And how much have you explored tiny habits? Like, have you read that book?
I
feel
yes
like
and no. So yes, but I don't remember everything that it was entailing.
So ending on that note, right? You gave your credentials, and I was going to do that. I'm glad you did that because people, again, that PDF idea is super cool. So what would you like to finish with? Because we got a couple more minutes here.
Sure. I think even just to help anybody start, like just from the ground, from where you're at, is just ask yourself the question, do I feel like I'm compassionate towards myself? Be honest with yourself, and maybe you are, like, a good portion of the time, but maybe like you need to sit down and reflect and think about maybe there's specific areas that you're not. I know for some of my clients, nurturing language is extremely difficult because they never heard it growing up. So we have all types of tools now, right? Like AI stuff, or just old, good old Google, where you can just look at what is nurturing language, and maybe write down 5 phrases that maybe feel a little, foreign to you, but that every single day you can start doing a little bit of mirror work, where you look in the mirror, like have to look into your eyes and actually speak that compassionate language toward yourself.
I love that, and I see that happen a lot with, actually more with my female clients, but I would say a lot in general, this harsh talk.
Yeah.
Right? And what's interesting, kind of, I relate it to what you're saying in that sometimes they'll say something like, well, I only lost X pounds.
Right.
It's like, but you haven't lost
you
any
lose?
pounds,
Okay.
right? You were stuck, right? So you're losing weight. Or, I only got this much stronger, right? And one of the things I relate to them is, who do you love? Is it your daughter, your son, your sister, your brother, parent? Think of that person, and then think about how if that person was going through the exact same thing you are right now,
Right.
and they achieved what you're criticizing yourself for right now, how would you communicate to them? I bet it would
Probably
be
not
different.
like that. Yeah.
And 99% of the time, people are like, yeah, I know. And I'm like, so if you would do that for someone you love,
Right.
why aren't you doing that for yourself?
Exactly.
And if you
Prioritize
don't
yourself
think
as
you
well.
are worth loving, then that's a whole different story, right? And that is maybe where the trainer doesn't play as much of a role, and someone like you can come in and
Absolutely.
really help someone with that.
Yeah.
So Stacey, this was awesome. It totally flew right by, and I think a
did.
lot of these topics are
Thanks,
just
guys.
so important, and I think the more that people hear these things and people start living these things, I think the world will be a better place. So thank you.
Become more normal.
More normal, right?
it's normalized.
By being more abnormal, right?
Exactly.
By us leaning into our differences, our
Yeah.
weirdnesses, our
okay.
flaws, it will become actually normal instead of fake normal like it is now.
Exactly.
So,
But thank you for having me.
yeah. Well, that was a good one.